If it were to become known that we are indeed not alone in the universe, how do you think the people of Earth would respond? And what if we found out that our governments were harboring alien guests here in clandestine operations without our knowledge? Do you think there'd be rioting and looting in the streets all over the world? In our fear, would we start an intergalactic war? A true war of the worlds? Or would we, as portrayed by Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, welcome them with open arms? The only true way that we can find out how we will react is when it happens. Since the UFO phenomenon came to the forefront in the 1940s, people have questioned what is flying through our skies almost on a daily basis. But as much as we have tried to get answers to what we are seeing, we have been denied that knowledge by the world's governments. But some of our leaders have been brave enough to step up and on occasion left the proverbial breadcrumbs, keeping their dream of getting the truth alive. President Ronald Reagan on more than one occasion mentioned life elsewhere, and on one occasion he left a cryptic message in his speech about aliens among us.
I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Gathered in a schoolyard with about 20 other men, and we saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies, and it got closer and closer, and when it was just above the treetops, it changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was, and I still don't know what it was.
We have had presidents that have had the courage to stand up and tell what they believe, and others that have even tried to do things to progress the disclosure of UFOs. Unfortunately, on the flip side, we also have had presidents that have made light of and ridiculed the subject. These presidents insult the intelligence and integrity of the honest, intelligent men and women of all walks of life that have had encounters with UFOs.
3 astronauts of Apollo 11 who went to the moon back in 1969 all said that they believe there is life beyond Earth. Do you agree?
You know, I don't know, and I don't presume to know. What I know is there is life here on Earth, and that we're not attending to life here on Earth. We're not taking care of kids who are alive and unfortunately are not getting health care. We're not taking care of senior citizens who are alive and are seeing their heating prices go up. So as president, those are the people I will be attending to first.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, but telling the truth to your countrymen is just as important as all other agendas. Holding back scientific knowledge for the people because of a political agenda is wrong, irresponsible, and dangerous. Above the President, however, the entity that has lied and withheld information is the very ones that protect us, the military. The most famous alleged cover-up of a UFO incident took place at Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Witnesses described what they saw that fateful night in Roswell, New Mexico. They described beings outside the ship and a mostly intact vehicle with some strange metal wreckage. The members of the 509th Bomb Group, the elite nuclear weapons team in the United States at the time, claimed to have found a crashed flying disc. The entire world was abuzz and its attention was turned to Roswell.
Island. The Army Air Force has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
The very next day, the whole extraordinary story became the beginning of the biggest smokescreen in history. An object crashing to Earth, leaving wreckage scattered over the field, with multiple witnesses, and identified as a flying disc by an elite military unit, has suddenly become revealed as a weather balloon. When the 509th Bomb Group and other witnesses identified the object, they knew that they had something unique and extraordinary on their hands. But with military cleanup and retrieval, the weather balloon explanation became official. And as was standard in that day and age, as well as today, the military wanted to cover it up. No matter how silly the cover story, the military used threats on lives and families to keep them quiet. 5 years before the Roswell incident, there was a situation that made Roswell seem like a walk in the park as far as strangeness and ludicrous explanations by the military goes.
The news of the world, Wednesday, February 25th. Once again, Columbia's correspondents in world capitals and in the fighting zones in the Western Pacific are ready to give you the latest news direct by shortwave radio.
And now for news of our own West Coast, we take you to Los Angeles and the report of Byron Palmer.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area shortly after 3 a.m. Pacific wartime this morning. The anti-aircraft guns began barking during a blackout ordered by the 4th Interceptor Command at 2:25 a.m. The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach. Army officials declined to comment on the possibility that the object might have been a blimp. However, it required nearly 30 minutes to travel some 25 miles, far slower than an airplane. Watchers on the rooftop of the Columbia Broadcasting Building in the heart of Hollywood could plainly see the flashes of guns and searchlights sweeping the skies in a wide arc along the coastal area. Concussion of the shells could be felt in downtown Los Angeles, 15 miles away. U.S. Army planes quickly took to the dark skies, but whether they contacted the object has not been announced. Army officials say they will not comment until they receive a full report of the action. Although some watchers say they saw airplanes in the air, semi-official sources say they probably were the U.S. Army's pursuit. Several observers say they saw one or more planes spotlighted by 20 or 30 searchlights. The object moved southward, presumably over Huntington Park at the western edge of Los Angeles, and on southward to about Long Beach on the coast. By 3:30 a.m., observers said the object appeared to be over the south of Long Beach. Searchlights closely followed the object down the coast and kept it centered in their glare. Shells frequently could be seen bursting near the object, but none appeared to hit it. The shooting stopped about 3:30 a.m. The shooting brought warfare to the front door of this city of 1.25 million population for the first time since December 7th. Already it was alert to the presence off the Southern California coast of a Japanese submarine which had pumped 25 shells into an oil field north of Santa Barbara Monday evening. Because of the presence of the submarine, a 3-hour alert was ordered at dusk last night, and civilian authorities stood at their posts while the Army and Navy continued their search for the submersible. The evening alert ended at 10:23 p.m., but another was sounded at 2:22 a.m., and the blackout followed within 3 minutes. It covered Los Angeles County from Santa Monica to Pomona. At 2:27, all Southern California radio stations were ordered off the air, except those in San Diego. Approximately 20 minutes after the firing died down, the ship returned and headed westward from Long Beach toward Santa Monica. The guns went into action again, hurling round after round of shells at the object. The second barrage appeared to be closer to downtown Los Angeles, since watchers could hear the concussion of the guns more clearly, and the flash of bursting shells was brighter. Then the ship disappeared for the second time over the ocean. We return you now to CBS in New York.
2 times in one night, an object flies over the Los Angeles metropolitan area at speeds slower than an airplane. And as this report says, and is historically documented, wartime blackouts ensued and anti-aircraft fire opened up on this object. Between 1,400 and 1,700 rounds were pumped into this object, and whatever it was remained unscathed and leisurely went on its way. Now remember, they shot for over 1 hour and used 1,400 plus shells. Also note that this was over a heavily populated city. It could and did cause civilian deaths. No commander in his right mind is willing to have to explain even one civilian death, not to mention the amount of ammo used, which was in short supply. With a little bit of research, we can confirm these facts. The military continued to shoot at something that was unaffected by over 1,400 anti-aircraft rounds. Civilian and military witnesses stating on the record that they saw something. One confirmed picture showed something that was not a weather balloon or any known craft. No weather balloon could stand up to that much anti-aircraft fire, and no military commander would continue to fire on something that was destroyed. Beyond that, any attempt to dismiss this as a balloon or jittery military commanders, 2 of the main explanations, does not hold water or even stand up to good old common sense. After the Battle of LA and Roswell and other alleged crashes, not to mention the numerous reports coming in from all over the country, the United States government had no choice to do at least a token investigation into the UFO phenomenon. The U.S. Air Force's investigatory program was officially launched on January 2, 1948, under the codename Project Sign. From the 243 cases studied, a report entitled An Estimate of the Situation was compiled by the Air Technical Intelligence Center and concluded flying saucers are probably extraterrestrial aircraft. Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg found these conclusions unacceptable. He then ordered the Air Force to go out and find more earthly explanations. Project Sign then transformed into Project Grudge. 244 cases were studied. It concluded, most reports of unidentified flying objects have been the result of persons failing to identify familiar phenomenon, such as reflections on bright surfaces in the day or lights in the night sky. In 1952, it finally became known as Project Blue Book. By now, the information being gathered was being divided. Cases that were difficult to disprove disappeared, while sightings that were easily dismissed were made public. On February 28, 1960, the first director of the CIA, Roscoe H. Hillenkotter, broke his silence in a statement in the New York Times. He declared, "It's time for the truth to be brought out in open congressional hearings." Behind the scenes, high-ranking officers are soberly concerned about the UFOs. But through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. He charged that, to hide the facts, the Air Force has silenced its personnel through the issuance of a regulation. This was a secret time in America. America was obsessed with anti-communist sentiment, and there was great paranoia.
Face of communism. Union Square in New York was the backdrop for these scenes of red violence. From their ranks would come the saboteurs, spies, and subversives, should World War III be forced upon America.
In addition to this, Orson Welles had demonstrated 20 years earlier just how gullible Americans were, and how easily the public stampeded with fatal results.
That I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey cargo tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
It wasn't only America, however. In Europe, the military presence under the direction of NATO, SHAPE was tracking a large number of UFOs on radar flying at high altitudes and great speeds over Central Europe, and then disappearing to the north. Their activities generated concern among the military commanders as a possible threat from Russia. However, repeated demonstrations of advanced technology by these objects made it very clear to military authorities that these capabilities were far beyond anything that we or the Soviets possessed. At that point, SHAPE headquarters launched a 3-year investigation to determine what these objects were. Their conclusions are still classified to this day. Robert Dean, former intelligence analyst attaché, claims to have seen a report at NATO headquarters during the early 1960s. It was entitled An Assessment.
After all the material had been collected, they brought it together and they wrote the final report with all of the appendices and annexes. Then, at that time, they made a determination and a recommendation to General Lemnitzer, the American 4-star general that I worked for. And they suggested, this is so sensitive, this reality is so delicate, the conclusions that we have reached, we believe could be essentially and substantially earth-shaking to the people unless they're prepared for it. We believe at this point that this should be given the highest classification NATO has, at that time was and still is, cosmic top secret.
Not everyone agreed. While still in Congress, Gerald Ford sent a letter to L. Mendel Rivers, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, on March 28, 1966.
Strongly recommend that there be a committee investigation of the UFO phenomenon. I think we owe it to the people to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the greatest possible enlightenment on this subject.
In 1966, congressional hearings were held with Secretary of Defense Harold Brown and scientific advisor of Project Blue Book, Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
What is the Air Force hiding in this investigation? We have not been hiding anything. The investigations have been made public. The explanations of those where there is a clear explanation have been made public. The hearing this morning was public for just that reason.
None of the evidence that I have examined would indicate any proof at all that we are being visited by extraterrestrials.
Dr. Hynek is one of the most important figures in this matter. As a senior government representative, he faithfully continued to dismiss all UFO sightings as swamp gas, mass hallucinations, temperature inversions, and conventional aircraft, until Blue Book was terminated in 1969. However, 4 years later, he founded the Center for UFO Studies, which is still active today. In 1985, shortly before his death, he revealed that Project Blue Book had indeed misled the public.
And I know the job they had. They were told not to excite the public. Don't rock the boat. And I saw it in my own eyes happen that whenever a case happened that they could explain, which is quite a few, they made point of that and let that out to the media. Things that the cases that were very difficult to explain, they would jump handsprings to keep the media away from them. For they had a job to do, to, whether rightfully or wrongly, to keep the public from getting excited.
In December of 1984, a roll of unexposed film arrived by mail at the home of TV producer Jamie Chanderay. The contents revealed the existence of a super-secret committee formed in late 1947 to deal with the wreckage recovered near Roswell, New Mexico, Operation Majestic 12. The Majestic 12 were highly accomplished men, 6 military and 6 civilian. Sworn to secrecy, they were to analyze the physical evidence to learn about the motives and ultimately the intentions of the occupants. There has been no official recognition of the Majestic 12 Committee. There is controversy regarding the authenticity of the documents. However, records were found later on to suggest the contrary. UFO investigators Bill Moore, Jamie Chenderay, and Stanton Freeman spent over 11 years searching through 17 different archives, sifting through a paper trail of over 250,000 pages of memos, flight logs, and letters. The researchers concluded the super-secret committee did in fact exist. Evidence has mounted over the years that point to, at the very least, our government and military covering up the knowledge of UFO phenomenon and have been involved in crash retrieval of extraterrestrial craft. There is even evidence presented of military action against possible otherworldly craft. But what if our government and military were holding secrets that could possibly lead to global annihilation?
Good evening. We begin with shocking allegations that UFOs have interfered with missiles at U.S. Air Force bases, and aliens are monitoring nuclear warheads and bombs. Our first guests claim UFOs have activated missile systems at 5 Air Force bases in 5 different states. They also claim a cover-up. Here in Los Angeles is Robert Hastings. He's author of UFOs and Nukes. I have the book right here. The book is available at UFOhastings.com. He has been investigating sightings at weapon sites for years. Bob Salas is a former captain, U.S. Air Force Base. At the U.S. Air Force, he was at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967, where there were claims a UFO caused missiles to malfunction. He's co-author of Fated Giant. Bob Jamieson is with us, former U.S. Air Force officer. He was at Malmstrom as well in 1967, and he says his superiors told him UFOs caused the malfunctions. And in Peoria, Illinois, is Dr. Bob Jacobs, former First Lieutenant U.S. Air Force, former U.S. Air Force photographic instrumentation officer. A UFO showed up on film that he shot in 1964 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and that was later confiscated by CIA agents. What's your explanation for UFOs at nuclear weapon sites?
I can simply say after 35 years of research that these incidents have taken place. There are hundreds of declassified documents which indicate that UFOs have demonstrated a distinct and ongoing interest in our nuclear weapon sites. I've also interviewed nearly 100 gentlemen who were involved in these incidents at various Air Force bases. This is very widespread. What you're seeing here this evening is the tip of the iceberg.
How do they cause a malfunction? What do they do to cause something to not work?
I think that's probably still an unknown. I know that Boeing engineers attempted to duplicate some of the malfunctions. They did succeed in doing that, but they still can't determine what initially caused them. Bob Salas could address that.
Bob, what happened at Malmstrom in 1967?
1967, I was on duty as a missile launch officer. I get calls from my guards upstairs. First, I get one call saying that they're seeing strange lights flying in the sky, and I didn't pay too much attention to that. About 5 minutes later, the main security guard, the flight security controller, calls down, says he's looking at a glowing red object, very large, hovering over the front gate. He wants to know what to do. I tell him to secure the facility. We hang up. I go to tell my commanders. So within seconds of that call, my missiles start shutting down. I recall losing all 10 of them.
You didn't see the object?
I didn't see the object because I was obliged to stay underground in the capsule.
By shutting down, we mean what?
By shutting down, what I mean is they were not launchable. They were in a no-go condition, disabled.
How long to restart them?
How long to restart? Well, I'm sure it took over a day, and maybe...
All right. Now, Bob Jamieson, you were there too, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were in the Air Force?
Yes, I was in the Air Force.
Where were you when this was happening?
Okay, I was a targeting officer, missile targeting officer. I was at home relaxing, and I got a call from Job Control to tell them to come in. A missile had gone down. My job as a targeting officer was to bring him back up. And so I went into...
So you didn't see the incident, you just went to the missile?
I went to the incident. I went to the site.
Where is Malmstrom?
It's Great Falls, Montana, just outside of Great Falls, Montana.
What did you make of the story?
Well, I know that it's true. I went into Job Control, after I got to the hangar, I was called in, went to the hangar, went to the job control, and I noticed they have a map of the whole complex with green lights where the missiles were good, but there's one small area with 10 red lights. I mean, those missiles were out.
Is it possible they just malfunctioned?
That doesn't happen. Very rarely does a missile malfunction, and I don't think any much more rare would be 2 at the same time, but never 10.
Now, Bob Jacobs, where were you? What were you filming, and where were you?
I was officer in charge of optical instrumentation at Vandenberg Air Force Base from 1963 to 66.
That's
Our job
California?
was to photograph. That's California, so right there on the coast.
Right.
And our job was to photograph with high-speed instrumentation every missile launch from Vandenberg going down the test range. They wanted to find out if we could figure out a place to put a telescope where we could get a side view of the missile so that we could see all 3 stages of powered flight. So I went up to Big Sur, California, up on a U.S. Forest Service road on Anderson Peak, and I installed a telescopic sight up there. The Air Force flew in a huge catadioptric telescope from the Cape. It was built by Dr. Walter Manning at Boston University. They put the telescope up there, and with that thing, which had a focal length of 2,500 inches, we photographed an Atlas missile raising up out of the fog cover and flying down range. We got all 3 stages of powered flight, and as the dummy warhead and the package flew on down range, we were all celebrating the fact that we had seen the thing and accomplished the mission. When I got back to the base with the film the next day, I was called into the office of Major Florence J. Mansman, and there were 3 people in gray suits standing in there. There was a 16-millimeter camera and a screen set up. Major Mansman said, "Lieutenant, sit down and watch this." And he turned down the lights, turned on the camera, on the projector, and the film came on. And I recognized it as the film that we'd shot at Big Sur the previous day. Toward the end of the flight, I was looking at Major Mansman saying, "Pretty good stuff, huh, sir?" And suddenly he said, "Just watch this." And as I watched, the warhead, the dummy warhead, the chaff that was put out in front of it as a decoy to deflect the Russian anti-missile tracking radar, everything was flying along, and suddenly, in the same direction this stuff was flying at about 8,000 miles an hour, an object came into the frame, shot a beam of light at the warhead, flew up to the top, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew around the direction it was flying, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew down, shot another beam of light at the warhead, and flew out the same way it came in.
Well, I don't see. Why didn't you see this when you were shooting it?
Well, it was 600 to 800 miles away from us.
Oh, I got you. And they confiscated.
Well, first of all, Major Mansman said to me, "What was that? Were you guys screwing around up there?" I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Then tell me what that was." And I said, "We got a UFO." And he said, "Lieutenant, you are never to speak of this again. As far as you're concerned, this didn't happen."
Hold on, guys. I'll be right back. I got to take a break. Okay, that's weird. You think there's a national defense plan for aliens? Sounds crazy. We'll ask about that next. Do you think there's a plan for invasion by aliens?
I wouldn't presume to know that. I just simply know that the U.S. government does not obviously appreciate people such as myself and these gentlemen speaking out about this, what we're describing on an ongoing basis, decade after decade, at multiple Air Force bases, is disruption of our nuclear missiles.
We have an email from Kyle in Plainville, Massachusetts. Why would UFOs only disable U.S. defense systems and not another country? Is there a lesson to be learned in all this? Or do you think maybe, Bob Salas, they have disabled other countries?
They have. I know that there have been events in the Soviet Union where they have interfered there. They've been seen in just any country you can name, and they do disable communications, especially.
We have an email from Eric in Atlanta, Georgia. What can be done, if anything, to force the U.S. government and/or military to declassify and release all it knows about UFOs? Dr. Jacobs, when do you think that would happen? Do you think that would happen?
It would take a revolution in public opinion. The problem with this field is that it's surrounded by so many crackpots and weirdos who make a joke about it, that those of us who take it seriously and think that something is definitely going on that needs to be scientifically investigated, I think that we need a real scientific committee to be put together to look into these things. I think Robert can talk to this too.
Absolutely.
Bob Salas, you agree?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment real quick. The Air Force has perpetrated a fraud, especially in our case. They claim in their statement about UFOs that nothing has ever, no UFO incident has ever affected national security.
Say what? Our government claims that UFOs have never affected national security? Then what do you call an object hovering over a nuclear military base and shutting down the nuclear weapons there? I'm no military officer, but I would say that something neutralizing, on a whim, our most powerful weapons would qualify as a national security hazard. In late December of 1980, for 3 consecutive nights, military at RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge near Rendlesham Forest in England were besieged by strange lights and objects around their base. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt and several servicemen investigated the objects in the early hours of December 28, 1980, with radiation detectors, which detected radiation in the depressions and on the near side of a tray, although the significance of the readings they obtained is disputed. Halt investigated this sighting personally and recorded the events on his microcassette recorder.
Looking directly overhead, one can see an opening in the trees, plus some freshly broken pine branches on the ground underneath. Looks like someone came off about 15 to 20 feet up. Some small branches about an inch or less in diameter. Zulu 148, we're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmers' barnyard animals. It's very, very active, making an awful lot of noise. There's an pigmentation. You just saw a light where? Wait, where? Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there. So there it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir. So can I get some of it? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. I'm going to switch off. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from the site. Is it back again? Yes, sir. Oh, that's the flashlight set. Let's move out to the edge of the clearing so we can get a better look at it. See if you can get the star scope on it. The light's still there, and all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Yeah, we're heading about 110 to 120 degrees from the site out through to the clearing now. Still getting a reading on the meter. About 2 clicks. Meter's count 3 to 4 clicks, getting stronger.
Now it's now it's coming up. Hold up, there we go. About approximately 4 foot off the ground. Compass head to 110 degrees.
Alright, just turn the meter off. You gotta say that again. About 4 feet off the ground, about 110 degrees, getting a reading of about 4 clicks. Yes, sir. Yeah, but no, it's dying. No, it's dying. I think it's something other than the ground. I think it's something that's something variable here.
Tree right over.
We just spoke to the first night bird we've seen. We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. It's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird. To the left. Yeah, definitely moving left. Two lights. One light to the front, okay. One light to the left. Keep the flashlights off. There's something very, very strange. Keep the headset on and see if it gets any stronger. Okay. Give us a rundown.
Notation that this is on a beta reading too.
It's on a beta reading?
Beta
Okay.
still has been removed.
Okay. Pieces are falling off it again.
It just moved to the right.
Yeah.
Off to the right.
Strange. Why are you doing left? Let's approach to the edge of the woods up there. Can you want to do it without lights? Let's do it carefully. Come on. Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like a pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye. We passed the farmer's house and across into the next field. Now we have multiple sightings of up to 5 lights with a similar shape and all, but they seem to be steady now rather than a pulsating or glow with a red flash. We just crossed the creek, and we're getting what kind of readings now? Getting 3 good clicks on the meter, and we're seeing strange lights in the sky.
We're at the far side of the second farmer's field, and made sighting again about 110 degrees. This looks like it's clear out to the coast. It's right on the horizon. Moves about a bit and flashes from time to time. Still steady red in color. Also, after negative readings in the solar field, we're picking up slight readings, 4 or 5 clicks now on the meter. 305. We see strange strobe-like flashes to the rather sporadic, but there's definitely something, some kind of phenomenon. 305 at about 10 degrees horizon directly north. We've got 2 strange objects, half moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. That gets to be about 5 to 10 miles out, maybe less. The half moons are now turned into full circles. As though there was an eclipse or something there for a minute or two. 315, now we've got an object about 10 degrees directly south, 10 degrees off the horizon. And the ones in the north are moving, one's moving away from us. Moving out fast. There's one on the right heading away too. Yeah, we're both heading north. Hey, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal. 330, 330, and the objects are still in the sky, although the one to the south looks like it's losing a little bit of altitude. We're turning around and heading back toward the base. The object to the south is still beaming down lights to the ground. 0400 hours, one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon, still moving erratic and similar lights and beaming down as earlier.
The site investigated by HALT was near the eastern edge of Rendlesham Forest. The explanations given after the investigations said what HALT and his men saw were a lighthouse that was miles away and a fireball. The frantic farm animals were explained away as possible moonjack deer, which are known to make loud noises when frightened. Logically speaking, how could these men really mistake what they saw for a lighthouse that is miles away? It was part of these soldiers' duties and training to be able to gauge distances. Also, how do you account for the rising radiation that HALT was getting on the Geiger counter? Finally, after the initial frantic animal sounds, the whole forest went dead quiet. This would not happen with a bunch of soldiers trouncing through the woods. Perhaps the most widely known UFO sighting with military explanation was the Phoenix Lights on March 13, 1997. Hundreds of confirmed witnesses saw the lights in formation that night. This sighting lasted for more than 2 hours. There was another set of lights 2 hours later, which is where the controversy begins. The initial sightings of the lights began before 8 p.m. on that night and lasted around 2 hours. Suddenly the military decided to fly over Phoenix after the event was concluded and drop military flares. They then used these flares as a reasoning to debunk the lights, yet their flares were a separate event entirely from the Phoenix lights.
3 years after the 1997 sighting, the Arizona Air National Guard staged this demonstration, saying the lights were military flares.
We all got calls asking where our aircraft were that night, and we all checked, and none of our aircraft were in that area. But as we looked onward a couple months later, we found out we had visiting aircraft.
But the demonstration didn't settle the debate.
And I have to say that it just didn't make it. For anyone that had seen the true mass sighting, it was a joke.
Flares like these put off smoke, and witnesses say there was no smoke associated with what they saw. So now, more than a decade later, the lights remain a mystery, but one that Kitai says deserves a closer look.
So the data speaks for itself. I just urge people to look at the data, and that's one of the main reasons I came forward. If I can be a credible voice so that people actually look at the data, then I've done my job.
By using the latest technologies of Google Earth, the Geospatial Animation Project has been formed. This is a forensic simulation of the events that took place throughout Arizona on March 13, 1997, based on multiple witness accounts. In a coordinated effort to correlate times and witness observations, information for the simulations were provided by reports compiled by investigators Michael Tanner and William Hamilton from the combined databases of Village Labs, interfaced with reports provided by the National UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, and those of former Councilwoman Frances Emma Barwood in the weeks and months following the Phoenix Lights incident. Here is a video representation of the results of part of the Phoenix Lights event.
This is a forensic recreation of the Sky Harbor Triangle that was first reported near Carefree around 8:15 and was last reported near Sky Harbor at 8:40 p.m. The path of the craft has been pieced together by combining reports of similar objects. We begin with a view from the intersection of Lone Pine and Scottsdale Roads, 2 miles away from the craft as it hovers 1,000 meters over Lone Pine and Pima. The craft, depicted as 2 miles wingtip to wingtip, proceeds east down Lone Pine Road. The view moves to the intersection of Jomax and Tatum Roads, 3 miles south of the next sighting at 8:26 p.m. at the intersection of Lone Pine and Cave Creek Road. At this point, the object began a heading change and turned to the south. At 8:28 p.m., a report from a material site on the East Cave Creek Road put the craft halfway through the turn. This view is to the west from a point above Jomax and Tatum, roughly 3 miles from the center of the craft. At 8:30 p.m., Max and Shala Saracen reported the craft near Crave Creek and Pinnacle Peak Roads. This report included UFO occupants seen in the windows of a triangle which they described as at least 2 miles wide. At 8:35 p.m., the craft was observed from the intersection of North 32nd Street and East Shea Boulevard, proceeding south towards Squaw Peak, where it was last seen entering the Phoenix Metropolitan Valley. At 8:37 p.m., the craft was observed by Terry Mansfield and members of her hospice group on the south side of Squaw Peak. The next vantage point is the first publicly shown recreation of what then Governor Fife Symington would have seen as the object flew over Squaw Peak. At 8:40 p.m., the craft was reported from 36th Street in East Washington, where it hovered short of the northern edge of the airport perimeter. The final view is a recreation of what the tower crew would have seen had they been looking due north. Some reports have this craft departing directly vertically, a truly astounding conclusion to a truly astounding series of observations.
With the forensic evidence that has been presented with the Geospatial Animation Project, extrapolating sighting times and locations, it has been suggested that multiple objects of a mile or more each were possibly in the skies of Phoenix that night. There was also a high-altitude object that was a double-tapered V-shaped wing with a distinguishing arrangement of 5 sets of 3 lights. This craft was encountered by an American West flight at 18,000 feet on the northern edge of Phoenix. Speaking of high-altitude encounters, the air forces of the world have had their share of encounters as well. Pilots have chased UFOs, been chased, and like the nuclear missiles documented earlier, have had their weapons completely immobilized. Some of these incidents have even been captured on gun camera footage. This is gun camera footage from a Mexican Air Force fighter jet.
Pero, a ver, busquen eso que viene atrás de nosotros. Ve cómo se ve como en 2 fotos. Tiene como a las 7, 8 de la posición. Lo raro es que trae una punta adelante. ¿Hay algo? Un puntito adelante. A ver, ¿qué tenemos? Nada, señor. A ver, permítame, déjale busco. ¿Y nosotros? Comandante, ¿qué es eso?
¿Qué distancia más o menos lo tenías, Telles? Oye, a ver, abusados, es como...
Ahí van más. Van más, siguen más atrás. Son 10, 11 objetos.
Son muchos objetos.
Afirmativo. Iván. Va, uno.
The pilots look on in amazement as a formation of 8 UFOs cross their path.
¿Qué es eso? A ver, trata de enfocar.
Máximo.
Ok, no dejes que los dejes atrás. Ok.
Van.
Sigue ese, no lo dejes.
No, van todos, van aproximadamente como 10, como 4. ¿Ya lo dio? ¿Qué van pasando?
Tú manejas, no lo pierdes.
Ahí van.
3, 4, 5, 6. Son 6. Abajo o arriba o arriba.
En medio, ahí van.
1, 2, 3,
a la misma altura.
5. Qué barbaridad,
Ahí se van a ver bien. Y van a una velocidad, pero... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 en la pantalla.
Síguelo, no lo cierras. ¿Están a la misma altura, Telles?
Afirmativo.
Poquito, arriba.
8, 9, 10, 11 contando toda la cola. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11.
Ok, no sabemos qué estamos viendo, son unos objetos nada más luminosos que vienen a la misma altura que nosotros, pero no podemos saber qué distancia. ¿Por qué nos vienen siguiendo?
In this footage, the pilot is desperately trying to figure out what this object is.
Yeah, you can't get really bad on this thing. I don't know. Right up high now. Going like straight up. Really, isn't it?
This gun camera footage comes from the Long Beach Police Department helicopter. Notice the objects dropping from the main object. Almost looks like molten metal. With evidence presented that it is a very likely possibility that our government and military knows more than they are letting on about UFOs, would it be logical to assume that they have a defense plan for UFOs? In 2008, Air Force Instruction 10-206 was discovered. This document was intended to be a manual on the proper methodology on reporting different classifications of incidents. Chapter 5 of this document is entitled Communications Instruction Reporting Vital Intelligence Sighting. Section 5.6.3.3 is entitled Unidentified Flying Objects. If UFOs don't exist, why are they in the Air Force Training Manual? We know as of 2008 that the military was training for UFO encounters. We were always told that our government and military was indifferent to the UFO phenomenon. So why, at least 40 years earlier, did the United States Air Force Academy train cadets on UFOs? In 1968, cadets at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, were issued a textbook called Introductory Space Science. An entire chapter, Chapter 33, was entirely about UFOs. In conclusion, I ask these questions to you, the viewer. With all of the credible witnesses, whether it be scientists, military personnel, or even politicians, is it prudent to ignore the enigma of the UFO phenomenon any longer? Are we really going to bury our heads in the sand and ignore an issue that could possibly be the most important topic of our lifetime? In this episode, we have put forth compelling evidence of amazing encounters with UFOs that were covered up by military secrecy. Everything presented in these episodes are intended to challenge you, the viewer, to look at the world surrounding you with a curious eye. Question what you don't understand. And most importantly, keep an open mind about everything. You never know when you're going to have your own unreal exposure.